waterways and the communities depending on our waterways by really preventing pollution from all types of sources. We use all of the tools available to us, including legal enforcement. And when the laws are not protective enough, we can work on changing the laws. And that's really what we're doing here. By going at this from all different areas, we try and make sure that the communities that depend on a healthy Potomac are able to ensure that not just now, but for future generations. And so we're gonna hear first from our Shenandoah Riverkeeper, which of course, all of you probably know is a large tributary, joins in with the Potomac River around Harper's Ferry. And for those of you who've been there, it's a really beautiful area. So Mark Frondorf, Shenandoah Riverkeeper, why don't you get us started?
Sure, thanks, Betsy. I'm going to share my screens here if I can. Oh, wait, see if that yeah, that works. Before I start talking specific legislation in Virginia, I just wanted to give a real quick overview of changes in the Virginia General Assembly. We have an important election coming up this November, but last November, we also had an important election when all 40 seats of the Senate and 100 seats of the House of Delegates were up for grabs. And may have been a little bit of a surprise, but the Democrats, they took control of both houses by a very narrow margin, 21 Democrats and 19 Republicans in the Senate, and 51-49 for the Democrats over in the House. And in addition to, just some of the changes going on there, we also, in the General Assembly, lost some important people. Emmett Hanger, longtime senator and champion of the environment and Chesapeake Bay. He decided not to run for re-election and he stepped down. And Chap Peterson in the Senate, he was the chair of the Ag Committee and did a lot of really good work for the Commonwealth. He lost in the primary due to redistricting. And so there are some definite changes. But there's also some net gains, I think, also, when you look at the leadership in the Virginia Senate, for example, the folks that I have highlighted here, Scott Surville, Barbara Favola, and Mark Obenshain, they are all folks in either the Potomac or the Shenandoah watershed. Senator Surville, who we have done a lot of work with over the years, and Dean certainly has, regarding coal ash and whatever. He is now the Senate Majority Leader, and Barbara Favola there in Arlington is one of the whips. And on the Republican side, Mark Obenshain is now the Republican caucus chair. And on the House side, the House Majority Leader Charneil Herring in Alexandria, and Kathy Tran in Fairfax, and Todd Gilbert is the Minority Leader out of Shenandoah County. And so we definitely have representation in both houses regarding our watershed. And then if you want to look at the Senate Agriculture, Conservation, and Natural Resources Committee, Dave Marsden is now the chair of that committee. And Dave has done an awful lot of work with Potomac Riverkeeper Network over the years. And the folks highlighted in yellow are also people out of our either the Potomac or the Shenandoah watershed. Timmy French is the new District 1 delegate. He represents all of Clark County, Warren County, Shenandoah County, Frederick, City of Winchester, and French is has deep history out here in the Shenandoah Valley. And then on the House side, Alfonso Lopez is now the chair of the Agricultural, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources Committee. And again, Dave Bolivar and all the other folks that are there. Tony Wilt has been a strong supporter of the Chesapeake Bay and protection of the Shenandoah watershed out here in the valley. And so now I just want to talk about, there's, I don't know, there's probably 35 pieces of legislation dealing with water in the Commonwealth right now. And so it's a very fluid situation down in the General Assembly. And, this is really just a snapshot of 4 pieces of legislation that I want to, talk about right now. And so there's a lot of other work that's going on, and I don't mean to slight any of those, but I just want to highlight these 4. The first one is PFAS. The next one is about enforcement of water quality standards. And then I want to talk a little bit about HB 1182, which is we're in strong opposition against dealing with a diluting and watering down of the professional wetland delineator certification process. And then I also want to talk about a budget amendment regarding pay for outcomes when it comes to reduction of nutrient pollution in the waterways. So with the PFAS bill that's up, it's really going to be looking at accomplishing, 4 things. Right now, conventional treatment systems, they don't remove PFAS from our drinking water, our wastewater, or our biosolids. And we're learning more and more about just the prevalence of PFAS in so many of our discharges. And so this piece of legislation is really trying to go after that. It would require quarterly monitoring of PFAS and wastewater effluent, the influent coming into the wastewater treatment plants, as well as biosolids. And it would require the development of action plans to control the sources of certain types of PFAS in our drinking water, and require self-reporting on the part of industries using PFAS on what they are doing about it. And then finally, creation of a PFAS advisory committee made up of people from all areas of the Commonwealth, including citizens, to start taking a better look at this. It's an important piece of legislation, and it's something that needs to be done. Betsy, in a little bit, can probably talk a little bit more about it. She, I feel like I am, preaching to the choir or whatever, because Betsy really had a hand in helping to develop this legislation. And it's an important piece of legislation. And some people go, well, are other states doing this? And West Virginia is not really known as a bastion of environmental regulation or protection, nor really is Pennsylvania for that matter. But West Virginia, Pennsylvania, Maryland, North Carolina, Oklahoma, they've all either passed legislation to identify and control sources of PFAS, or they're coming up with regulatory actions to address it. And if you want to see in terms of biosolids, we've been working biosolids for a long time, and concerns about heavy metals and biosolids. And this is just a map, and I just sort of honed in on the Shenandoah Valley, really, and all the little brown blotches and squares. Those are all location for biosolid application areas. And so we can, quite honestly, we can be spreading PFAS throughout our food system inadvertently by applying biosolids into the Shenandoah Valley, which has really served as the breadbasket for Virginia for so many years. And so now I want to go back and just sort of talk about HB 1472. Deborah Gardner, she is a new freshman delegate out of just south of Richmond. And this piece of legislation really tries to go after the disconnect between numeric limits identified in pollution permits and narrative standards that exist in the Clean Water Act, that really go to the heart of the Clean Water Act of ensuring drinkable, fishable, and swimmable water. And so you can have a VIPTES permit, a Virginia pollution permit, that has specific numeric limits and technical requirements in the permit, but nonetheless, it does nothing to really address the narrative standards that are at the heart of the Clean Water Act. And so this would simply require water quality standards be met, particularly the narrative criteria in all permits. And when you look at this, you're like, well, is that really a concern? Well, here's this is a picture, an overhead picture of the James River, and this is a paper mill in on the James River, and you can see the effluent flowing down on the sort of center left of those five plumes, and this is not unlike the Luke paper mill up on the Upper Potomac that we went after, and right now this VIPTES permit allows the degradation of the James River to continue to occur, even though it's clearly impairing and impinging upon our ability to fish and to swim, and it even has potential implications for drinking water. And so that is it's just a real concern, and this is something that this bill wants to go after and to address. The next one is this professional wetland delineator bill, and really what this bill, we're strongly opposed to it, and it really is reducing and significantly weakening the certification requirements for delineators. And last year we had the Sackett case in front of the Supreme Court, and that removed federal protection from large areas of our nation's wetlands. And so it's becoming even more important that these wetland delineators, are skilled in what they do. And this bill would remove the ability for a field practicum to count as an examination. It would reduce the number of written references needed by these individuals. Remove the requirement for for them to complete a course of instruction that's been approved by the Board of Professional Soil Scientists, and reduce the years of experience from 6 years to 3 years. And so at the time that we need stronger delineators and people more professional in their positions, this would weaken and reduce that across the board. And then finally, I want to talk about this budget amendment. It's called Pay for Outcomes. And, recently the Caesar report came out talking about the Chesapeake Bay cleanup program. And collectively, it said that we are spending an awful lot of money in the Chesapeake Bay region, and we are not getting the return on our investment for reduction in nutrient loads and sediment loads. And so what this does, this would take $20 million out of the Virginia cost share program and put it into a pilot program in that and allow farmers to develop whatever process they want to develop to reduce non-point source pollution. And it would be measured in terms of cost per pound of nutrients. And as long as at the level of assurance that these nutrient reductions would actually take place and provide, increased habitat and resilience benefits. And it really would sort of put a carrot out instead of a stick. And we really think that this would empower farmers and agriculture folks to come up with their own creative ways to reduce the nutrient loads. And so this is a $20 million budget amendment. And we think that it has strong potential, and we believe that it's something that we really need to pursue. And so we'll definitely be supporting that. And then the last thing isn't a piece of legislation per se, but I just want to call attention. This came out 2 days ago by our good friend Andrew Wheeler in the executive office of the governor of Virginia, and they're actively trying to reduce by 25% the number of regulations put forth, in Virginia law. And the purpose, they say, is to reduce the overall regulatory burden. But this is really significant. It's not gotten very much attention at all. Right now, it was focused just on building of, I'm sorry, just read my notes to make certain that I get it correctly. Division of Building and Fire Regulations with respect to housing. But it's very clear that they are going after all the different departments and agencies, and that this is their notice of intended regulatory action, their NOIRA. And this is huge. It is bad. I mean, I don't even know how to explain it properly, other than this is just a really bad piece of activity that's being put forth by the administration, and it's something that we need to be paying strong attention to. And with that, I'll stop because I know that we have other people that need to be talking here. So
Thanks,
you.
Mark. That was an excellent job of going high speed through all the various things that we're working on in Maryland. In Virginia, and we are now switching over to Maryland to our Potomac Riverkeeper, Dean Nauyaks. Dean, take it away.
Hey, everybody. I just wanted to talk to you briefly about really three things: coal ash, PFAS, and and then obviously plastic. And really we have some bills in Maryland, the Clean Water Justice Act, that actually Betsy really worked hard and championed this. And it's an amazing bill. And really what it does, under the Federal Clean Water Act, the intention of the original Clean Water Act 72 was to protect all waters of the United States, right? And that when there wasn't protections, right, when the state agencies weren't enforcing, and there was an ongoing pollution issue, citizens had the ability to kind of intervene and take a polluter to court. And that's what Potomac Riverkeeper does and has been doing for 25 years to clean up the Potomac River and the Shenandoah River. And, these tools are amazing for us to use. And then, more recently, I'm sure most people heard about this recent Sackett decision. I'm not a lawyer, but the Supreme Court basically reversed Clean Water Act protections for a lot of waters in the United States, particularly wetlands and small streams, not to get too technical. But if you look at this chart right here, I mean, basically in Maryland, roughly 60%, that's a lot of our streams no longer have those, really federal protections, right? Now, the state of Maryland technically has the ability to enforce those protections. But what this law does is it gives communities that are impacted by pollution the ability to enforce the Clean Water Act, essentially, to enforce the laws and hold these polluters accountable, right? And I could give you a number of examples, but, at the end of the day, just, two quick ones I think are, the work that Brent Walls, our Upper Potomac Riverkeeper, did, found Luke Paper Mill, all these toxic discharges after the paper mill closed, after the Maryland Department of Environment signed off and said, they can go ahead and close. We've looked at this thing. Well, Brent found a lot of black liquor toxic discharges. We filed a federal case, and the Attorney General of Maryland joined us in that case, right? And we fixed that pollution issue. Downriver, I'm working with watermen on Metcom sewage. We actually filed notice of intent to sue because basically the Maryland Department of Environment knew that there was all these sewage overflows that were happening for many, many years. They weren't doing anything other than issuing some minor penalties. It wasn't fixing the problem. And then there was a big sewage spill that led to a lot of people eating tainted oysters, sewage tainted oysters that got a lot of people sick. It got a lot of attention, but still there was no action from the state. So with Watermen, Potomac Riverkeeper Network intervened. We filed notice of intent to sue under the Federal Clean Water Act. And then the Attorney General of Maryland said, hey, we're going to take this into the state court, right? And that's good. We're fixing that problem. But right now, with this new Supreme Court decision, there's just a lot of these waterways that are no longer have those protections and the ability for groups like ours. So there's this Faulkner coal ash landfill, which is very small streams around it, these intermittent or ephemeral streams that lead from, and we know that this coal ash landfill is leaking, Right now, it'd be very tough for us to bring a case against this facility to fix this toxic coal ash from leaking. It's not to say we can't, but it just makes it harder. And really, at the end of the day, all communities really can do without this law is to put pressure on the state and the attorney general to do something. What's great about the Federal Clean Water Act and what's great about this bill is it allows communities to not wait around for the state or federal agencies to fix this problem. You can take action on your own, just like Potomac Riverkeeper Network has done repeatedly over and over and over again. And it's just a really powerful tool. And I think literally in 50, 75 years, we're going to look back at this law if it passes and say, wow, what an amazing thing. Somebody really had the foresight to make sure that communities continue to have these protections. So in a nutshell, that's the Clean Water Justice Act, right? On the other hand, and I don't have a bill number like Mark. I'm sorry, I don't have some fancy slides with bill numbers, but we don't even have a name of this bill, but we're working on coal ash. For those of you who don't know, I've been working on coal ash for better part of 10 years now. And I've worked on it in North Carolina and I worked on it in Virginia. We got a really good law passed in 2019, or at least a decent law that required Dominion to clean up 28 million tons of toxic coal ash and put it into lined landfills. And then 25% of that was recycled. I think more of it should have been recycled, but this is the compromise we worked with under a Republican-led legislature at the time. And, we've learned from what worked, what didn't, some problems. And, recently, Delegate Lehman from Maryland came to Betsy and I, and she said, hey, I'm really concerned about coal ash and what can we do about it? And she asked us to help draft legislation. And we've been working on that, and it's not perfect. We're trying to get outside expertise to help us figure this out. But in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is these coal ash ponds, and there are no coal ash ponds in Maryland. There's just coal ash landfills. And all of these coal-fired power plants have tons of residual called CCR materials, coal combustion residual materials laying around these facilities that are just leaching all these toxic heavy metals like arsenic, selenium, mercury into groundwater, into people's drinking wells, into surface water that gets into our fish, gets into people eventually. And it's dangerous. And, in our opinion, we just haven't seen real adequate solution. All the coal ash landfills in Maryland where they said, hey, this is the solution years ago. We're going to put these into individual cells and we're going to put these into a landfill that's just for coal ash. Well, all of these landfills are leaking now, toxic material into our waterways. And so what we're trying to do with this bill is, and I should back up, the EPA, passed and required these coal ash regulations in 2015, but they just didn't go far enough. And they've said, quite frankly, that this is a minimal baseline that states should do better and can do better. But this is a minimal requirement for cleaning up coal ash ponds specifically. North Carolina adopted rules that are stronger than what the federal requirements are. So has Virginia. And we're trying to do the same thing here in Maryland, right? We're trying to deal with this issue. And right now, what we're trying to do is really encourage the idea of recycling. We just don't want to clean up coal ash, put it to another landfill into a community that doesn't want it, right? None of these communities want coal ash, landfills or coal ash in their communities. And in Maryland right now, there's, if you go to Montgomery County, for example, where the Dickerson coal-fired power plant is, there is a coal ash landfill called the Westland coal ash landfill. And there's a cement company there. And they're recycling and reusing this stuff. Now, under the EPA rules, right, it's called beneficial encapsulation, beneficial use. And the idea is that we take these heavy metals, this coal ash, and we put it into bricks and blocks and encapsulate it, right? And it becomes safe, according to all the stuff that all the science that we see, right? And that we know from EPA. And the idea is just to repurpose this. And right now, this will probably blow your mind. We're importing toxic coal ash from other countries, right? And a lot of these cement companies want this coal ash because it strengthens blocks and bricks. The Roman aqueducts are still standing today because they were used and built with volcanic ash, which has very similar chemical characteristics to coal ash, right? And instead, what's happening is we're leaving this stuff in the ground, and it's all leaking into groundwater, into surface waters, into people's wells. And we really don't have solutions. The EPA regulations don't go far enough. And we're importing coal ash from other countries, and we're actually importing like boiler slag and other byproducts to put into the cement when these companies actually want coal ash, right? And we have this abundant supply of coal ash in the ground. So we're trying to kind of flip the script on this. We're trying to like incentivize and require cleanup and recycling of this ash. And that's what this bill is intended to do, and create penalties and a stick approach. If you're going to leave all this ash laying around your site, if you're going to not clean up these landfills and contaminate groundwater, you are going to be penalized, right? And that's the intent of the bill. And it requires an inventory of, looking at where are all these coal ash sites located. And so that's part of the bill, to start doing an assessment. But at the end of the day, the real intent of this bill is to force beneficial reuse, recycling, and cleaning up of these landfills and waste sites, waste disposal sites. And, under the Hogan administration, enforcement had dropped by about 85%. And we just have not seen much action on MDE from this issue. I think things are improving under this new administration. But the good thing is that EPA, after yelling at them for better part of 10 years, they've now elevated coal ash enforcement to their #1 enforcement priority. And so EPA is taking this more seriously. We're hoping Maryland does as well. And we're trying to like really change things and learn from, what other states have done. It's pretty amazing to me. In North Carolina and South Carolina specifically, Duke Energy and other utilities are doing a tremendous amount of recycling. As of 2018, Duke Energy is now recycling about 80% of their fly ash. And so it's happening in other states. I think the challenge is Maryland doesn't think they have a coal ash problem. We're trying to convince them that they are. And I could go on and on about this issue, but it's just a really important subject matter. And we're just trying to come up with real meaningful solutions to give industry. And on a last note, for every 1 ton of coal ash that is encapsulated and recycled, that's 1 ton of CO2 emissions that are not going into the air from these cement plants. So we have companies now like Heidelberg, which are from Germany and take climate change very seriously. They're trying to go carbon neutral, and they see coal ash recycling as a solution to helping them move toward to that goal. And we're trying to figure out ways to make that happen in Maryland. So, we're still working on this bill. It's in draft form, but that's something we feel is very, very important and top priority for us. And that's something that we're working on. Lastly, I'll just be really quick. Plastic pollution is a really serious threat to water quality and public health. Everybody now pretty much has plastic, like PFAS, plastic in their bloods, particularly young children. We're finding it in lungs and their umbilical cord. We're supposedly eating about a credit card side of plastic every week, every Americans. It's in our food, it's everywhere. And what's happening, it's ending up in our waterways and breaking down. And so the challenge for Potomac Riverkeeper Network and our awesome Potomac River is really it borders 4 states and then the District of Columbia. And so anytime we're working on things, whether it's PFAS or, coal ash or plastic pollution, we have to get laws passed in Maryland, DC, Virginia, and it's really challenging, as well as West Virginia, Pennsylvania, where Brent is working, even more challenging, right? And so that's one of the things that we're working on. Is there's several bills, and Betsy can talk more about this when we go to Q&A, but we have some bills in Maryland that are attempting to start getting at this. There was a EPR bill, extended producer responsibility, which puts the burden on the producers of this plastic waste to start updating and you know, modernizing our recycling systems. Maine, Oregon, other states have adopted this. State of New York is moving that way. But that doesn't fix the plastic crisis. We need to figure out a way to start banning and stop using single-use plastics, right? This is really the problem. This, you know, we're not saying we want to ban every plastic. We know there's really important things that plastic is used for in medical industry and others. But this idea that we have a Gatorade bottle that lasts 450 years that we discarded yesterday and then continues to break down and leach toxic plastics into our waterways, into our fish, into our children is really, really dangerous and something we need to work on. So, you know, we have some bills in Maryland. I'm not going to go in details, but we're also working in DC on a bottle bill as well. And this is, you know, so in addition to all the lawsuits and all the things that we're doing, these are really important legislative priorities that we really need people like you that are listening to help us be a voice and a champion on clean water. And I'll stop there, kick it over to Brent because he's got some important things to talk about. But anyway, thank you for joining us and taking the time to learn more about this important work.
Thanks, Dean. And Brent, take away the conversation with the rest of the Maryland bills we can talk about in 1 hour.
Oh, all right. Exactly. You want to share that screen for the slides. Thanks, Dean. I really appreciate it. And, you know, Dean's hard work is really a testament to his tenacity in trying to really solve the problems here in the Potomac watershed. So, you know, between him and I and Betsy and Mark and many of the staff at Potomac Riverkeeper Network, many of us have 20 years of just working on pollution issues at the state level, at the federal level. And I have been personally working in Maryland on Maryland issues for about 20 years. And in no time in that 20-year period did I ever really see Maryland Department of the Environment deny a permit to a new discharger or revoke a permit from a renewal from an NPDES permit holder. And so it's about time that we actually start looking at where our pollution sources are in Maryland and what communities that it's affecting. And so here's a map that hopefully you can look at and digest. And the dark shaded areas are all your social, economic, low income populations. And it's a lot harder to see, but it really correlates well with your disadvantaged populations. For African Americans and Latinos, and along with that, and you can see where all the black dots are. The black dots are fish consumption advisories for PCBs, PFAS, mercury, and a number of other different pollutants. And you can see a high proportion of these fish consumption advisories are in social economic vulnerable areas. And a little bit harder to see the green dots and the orange dots. The green dots are biosolid active permits being spread on the fields. And then the orange dots are your major wastewater treatment plants. And again, a lot of those permits are well correlated in your disadvantaged communities. And so the Environmental Justice Bill, SB 96 and HB 24, is an extremely important bill. And I recommend that everyone really look into this bill, support this bill, because it really requires an environmental justice evaluation, which has been needed for a very, very long time. Environmental justice has been put off to the side as more of a description of the area and not necessarily involved in the decision-making process for new permits or permits that are going through a renewal process. And so what this environmental justice evaluation includes is looking at the nature of the facility, what kind of pollutant is going to be discharging, what are the stream impacts, is the stream that it discharges into a 303 delisted impaired waters stream. It also looks at the history of that entity and whether or not they've had pollution violations in the past, or pollution violations in other regions where they may have operations. And so, this process is extremely important because, this would give Maryland Department of the Environment the authority to deny new NPDES permits or modify or even deny the modification of existing permits, especially if that modification is going to increase or include more pollution issues. And that's a powerful, powerful ability for communities to be able to protect themselves and for the state to acknowledge the fact that these disadvantaged communities have larger and more proportional amount of pollution going into their local streams and rivers. um, and so we're going to be supporting this bill. We strongly recommend you, everyone on this call, and pass it along to everyone that that we really need to support this bill. We can go to the next one. So the other bill that we're going to be talking about, and there's, like Dean had said and Betsy has said, there are a number of bills that we're going to be looking at and supporting, but we just wanted to highlight a couple of them, and then we can answer some questions. So in that 20 years of working with Maryland Department of the Environment and on pollution issues in Maryland, I have seen the fact that the limited number of employees that are available to review and look at discharge permits in the state of Maryland. And as of January 2024, for instance, there are 638 NPDES permits that are in significant non-compliance. Now, this is straight from Maryland Department of the Environment's website. 39 of those facilities have major effluent violations, but the majority of them have missing reports. Now, these are self-reported, violations, self-reported effluent overloads of their permit. And out of the 638 that are now significant non-compliance, there's roughly 26,000 NPDES permits that Maryland has that is registered under EPA ECHO database. So that's 26,000 permits that need to be looked at, need to be written, need to be reviewed. And essentially for a very long time, MDE just has not had the manpower to be able to review this. They have not had the manpower, they have not had the time, and the fees that are involved in allowing the state to increase its personnel and increase its time. And I think we lost the screen. I'm seeing some email here. And and so
Sorry, bumped the wrong button.
Bumped the wrong button. That's fine. I mean, I think I got my point. Essentially, it's, this bill is extremely important. I don't think do we have a House bill or a Senate bill number for this one yet? I don't believe we do. Oh, wait, it's House Bill 245, I believe it is. And so it's extremely important that we support this. Not a lot of times we are adversaries of the state. I know that as a Riverkeeper, myself, Dean, and Mark, we work well with the regulators of the state, the compliance officers, the compliance division. But there are a lot of times that we are a little bit of an adversary. We're trying to continuously push the state to do more, push the state to uphold the values, what they're supposed to do, and protect our rivers and streams. And, we really want to support MD in this move forward to increase the fees for permits, and that would help in increasing the budget availability for them to do their job. I think that's kind of it for the bills that we're going to be, and there's a number of other bills. I think we're looking at some PFAS bills again this year, and but I don't think we have the details on that just yet.
Great, thank you all. I want to allow some time for questions because I know that was kind of
Yeah.
rapid fire. There were a couple I gave short answers to in the Q&A, but I might throw them out to the proper Riverkeeper here for a little more detail. Dean, there was a question about what's happening with Dominion's coal ash in Virginia.
Great question. So, yeah, we're still working on that. Basically, you know, the bill passed in 2019, requiring them to develop a plan to either recycle or landfill, the ash, right? And 25% of the 28 million tons need to be recycled. Unfortunately, Possum Point, we thought was going to be a site for recycling. They want to landfill all this ash right near Potomac Shores communities, basically 50,000 new residents essentially that have moved in there and don't really understand that this is Dominion's plan, that they want to leave this ash right where it is. I mean, not where it is. They want to put it into a landfill. They want to take it out of Pond D, which is about 4.5 million tons, and move it right over adjacent to Pond D and create a landfill, right? And they say it's going to be a double hold. It's going to last 400 years, but every coal ash landfill that I know of is leaking. And I just don't think it's a solution. I know that probably a lot of people in Potomac Shores don't want it. We are trying to address, there's significant groundwater contamination underneath of that. There was a new research that came out showing that there was significant contamination linked to coal ash in Quantico Creek. We still have people on bottled water on Cherry Point Road around, and people who've been poisoned and their wells contaminated on Possum Point Road, right? So there's just still a lot of issues to address. We're working to offset and address the groundwater. We're trying to require Dominion to have to pump and treat all that contaminated groundwater. But this is a steep challenge. This is one of the things that we're seeing at the 30,000 foot level, the federal level. We know that there's significant groundwater contamination almost under every coal-fired power plant around these coal ash ponds, and very few of these utilities are actually doing anything to remediate the groundwater. They're pushing what's called natural attenuation or monitored natural recovery, which means let the environment clean it up and let all these toxic metals leach into the river. So we've been yelling at EPA, and we're meeting with DEQ, and we're just trying to get an adequate plan. But there's going to be public hearings coming up around this solid waste permit for this new landfill that they want to propose. And that'll probably be sometime in the summer. We're trying to have public hearings and public forum prior to that to educate the community about what's happening, to start charting a course and direction. And I've now met with the new chair, Deshandra Jefferson. She says she's very supportive and concerned about this issue in Prince William County. So I'm very glad that there's some new leadership there that says they want to deal with the issue of coal ash and move the county in the right direction. So we'll see where that goes, but rest assured, we're working on that too. So thank you, and sorry for the long answer.
None of these are easy topics. This is not directly related to legislation, but related to one of our big victories, and this is also to you, Dean, is what's next with Dahlgren?
Well, speaking of Clean Water Act, we had a big victory over the Navy. We filed notice of intent and required them to get a Clean Water Act permit. It's very clear, under federal code that munitions and any type of, artillery that's being shot into the river has to have a Clean Water Act permit. It's the largest open water test range in the country. We won a big victory by requiring the Navy to get a Clean Water Act permit. They agreed to this. The next round, though, is we've met with Maryland Department of Environment and about establishing limits. What are those limits for the permit going to look like in terms of how much, munitions can they put in the river through their weapons testing range? That is going to be the next fight, really, quite frankly. So all the work that we do, Mark up on the Shenandoah, these factory farms and cattle operations, or the work Brent's doing on PFAS, my work on coal ash, this stuff takes years and years. And I think that's just the work that we do, is we take on these fights that we just don't go past legislation and claim a victory and walk away. We work on this stuff for years and years. And so this fight with the Navy, we won round one, the establishing effective limits that are protective of water quality. and the uses of the river and protecting aquatic life in the river are going to be really, really important. And that's going to take, MDE has about 2 years. The Navy has 2 years to get a Clean Water Act permit. And we're working right now to influence the outcome of those limits in that permit. So we'll see where that goes. Thank you. Great question, though.
Thanks, Dean. Mark, this one's to you, and I'm going to paraphrase it to simplify a little bit. But what's going on with algae and harmful algae blooms in the Shenandoah? Oops, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, the General Assembly last year, they put $2.5 million into a 3-year harmful algal bloom study that's being conducted, overseen by DEQ, but being conducted by USGS and the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin. They got a late start last year, quite honestly, but the first 2 years are to be collection, and then the third year is going to be spent on developing conducting analysis findings and developing recommendations. So that's going on. Also last year, Virginia, we sued Virginia twice and lost twice to get numeric nutrient limits put in place for nitrogen and phosphorus in the Shenandoah. David Paler, before he left his position as director of DEQ, he agreed finally to put in numeric nutrient limits. Originally, it was going to be nitrogen and phosphorus. They opted to go using chlorophyll A as a stand-in, and those numeric limits were put in place. And they just started collecting data last year on that. So there's a lot of work that's being done behind the scenes. And then the other important piece of news, good news, honestly, is Xylem and the nutrient water quality monitoring down in the Potomac. They agreed to put in place 2 sensor buoys up on the Shenandoah, one on the North Fork and one on the South Fork, that will be conducting nutrient analysis, pH, and a host of other things that are still being fleshed out, but they should be put in place in time for the algal season for this year. So there's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to try to address the algae issues in the Shenandoah.
Thanks, Mark. And Brent, I'm going to add a little tiny thing to the question that came to me because I know some of the work you were doing on PFAS. I know that Maryland recently came out with some new fish advisories. And can you talk a little bit about what you looked at with those, how they fit together, implications, et cetera?
Yeah, sure. So, as Betsy said, MDE did recently come out with fish advisories for PFAS in several locations across Maryland waters. And what was interesting in a couple of areas, I might even be able to pull up the map if that's possible. Let's see. Share my screen. Share. So if you can see my cursor at all, we have a number of green active biosolid permits being spread on farm fields in the northeastern corner of Frederick County. And just downstream from that is a fish consumption advisory location. And it seems to occur like that in several locations where you have biosolids upstream of popular fishing destinations. And, and also at the same time, we know for a fact that we have a lot of wastewater treatment plants that do not have limits for PFAS because it's not something that has a standard or that's associated with the permit as we speak, but we do know that PFAS is definitely polluting and coming out of our discharge streams into our rivers and streams. I sampled Antietam Creek a number of years ago, and I sampled the discharge from Hagerstown and the discharge from Smithsburg, two very different sized populations of wastewater coming out. One's well over 1 million gallons per day, and the other one is around 60,000 gallons per day. And both had significant levels of PFAS. In Hagerstown, there's a lot of commercial, a lot of industrial sources that are upstream that are contributing to the effluent values of PFAS. But in Smithsburg, it is 90% residential and a few commercial operations, very, very little industrial. And so what that's telling us is that residential sources where we use products every single day is a major contributor to PFAS into our wastewater treatment plants and then also into our rivers and streams. And so it's a good thing that Maryland is moving forward, and we've been pushing Maryland for a number of years to make strides in assessing the PFAS levels throughout the state. And so it's not very many states out there have issued fish consumption advisories. However, we're not completely satisfied with the fish consumption advisories as they stand right now. One of the reasons is they've only looked at PFOS, and that is one of thousands of different PFAS compounds that are out there. And so, our concern is that the levels of PFAS that could be impacting those that are consuming fish on a necessary basis are going to be actually getting higher levels of various different PFAS compounds than just PFOS. And so the levels of fish consumption that MDE has put out there do not seem to really fit with the amount of PFAS that I think is being ingested. And there's a lot of studies that are out there right now, but it's a good first step. It's a good first start as we push Maryland Department of the Environment to continue their assessment of PFAS and continue to look at the sources upstream.
And I just want to add that, big picture, I think the big picture on this for us is that while EPA is developing a standard for drinking water, right, 4 parts per trillion, we're finding PFAS levels in fish that are alarming. I live on Piscataway Creek. We have sunfish 10 miles down from Andrews Air Force Base, which is a known source of PFAS. And the first fish consumption advisory issued in the state of Maryland, that is 1.4 million times higher in fish 10 miles downriver than the EPA standard for drinking water. So you have people that are, low income, subsistence fishing. People are eating these fish, feeding them to their families. They have no idea they're poisoning their families. And then we also have uptake in crops from biosolids, and several states like Michigan and Maine have banned the biosolid application because of PFAS on farm fields. And so, research from the European Union is showing that most people are PFAS that's ending up in our bodies is coming from ingestion. And while EPA is working on a drinking water standard, as they should, we're way behind on, the ingestion and how it's getting into, our bodies through ingestion, whether it's fish or food. And that's something that we're trying to work on and push in a major, major way. And I've learned a lot from Brent. He's an expert on this issue. It's just amazing how far we've moved this ball, but we've got a long way to go.
And the new evolving, area of interest is those that are on private well water, especially in karst geology areas like what we have out in Washington County, where the subsurface flow mixed quite easily with our groundwater and into our wells. But it's such a limited amount of information that's coming that people know about the quality of their private well water. And so, there's been a lot of interest in public drinking water. There's starting to finally be some interest in fish consumption. And I think there might be, looking at some consumption of other food products that are coming off of farm fields. But you know, it's the private well water that always seems to lag behind. And so that's going to be another topic, another area that I think we're going to look into in the next couple of years.
Out here in the Shenandoah Valley on that biosolid map that I showed earlier, granted, it's a data point of one, but it showed a fish collected back in 2013, so 11 years ago, with extremely high PFAS levels. And that was just downstream of the Mount Crawford wastewater treatment plant that is run by Rockingham, Harrisburg wastewater treatment plant, which was alarming. I don't have the exact number right in front of me, but it was extremely high.
Just, we got only a couple minutes left, but Mark or Brent, if you just want to give a quick comment on why we're seeing such high levels coming out of wastewater treatment plants.
Well, one of the reasons why we're seeing high levels of PFAS coming out of wastewater treatment plants is even your smaller chain PFAS, your, you know, smaller carbon fluorine chain PFAS, which doesn't seem to be a lot of focus on. When they get into the environment of wastewater treatment plant, they actually connect together and become those longer chain PFOS and PFOA, which those particular compounds are more toxic to us, more bioaccumulative in fish, and therefore we're going to be ingesting that. And when the wastewater treatment plant does filter out, you're still getting significant amounts of those longer chain PFAS compounds, but you're getting even more of those longer chain PFAS compounds in the biosolids. And when the biosolids go onto the farm fields, it'll stay in the soils for a very long time and can immediately be run, you know, through groundwater after rain events and right into our rivers and streams. There is really no biological function, natural biological function out there that breaks the carbon fluorine bonds down, and so you're getting this continuous flow of PFAS into our rivers and streams. And that's, you know, that's in a sense why we are so concerned about biosolids, why we are so concerned about wastewater treatment plants, because that's continuing the cycle of putting PFAS into our aquatic species and into our drinking water and into our bodies.
And it's coming from, you know, a variety of sources into the wastewater treatment plant. But like, for example, we know that metal plating facilities are a big source of PFAS. And so we're starting to see, like, over some encouraging things where, like, they're requiring pre-treatment from these facilities that are discharging PFAS that's getting into the wastewater treatment process, that's getting into biosolids, that's getting onto farm fields, that's then leaching off and getting into fish, right? And then being uptake into crops. So, you know, there's a lot of ways, and I know this can seem very overwhelming to a lot of people. It was to me, but learning a lot from Brent, and this is similar to what we dealt with in the 70s with PCBs. We just have to stop manufacturing, which has largely been done, like in firefighting foams, but more importantly, shutting off the sources of contamination. And that's the work that we are doing, and pushing and trying to find these sources and fix and eliminate these sources. So the work that Brent did in Maryland led to a hold on new biosolid application permits, right? Because of directly of the work that he has done. We're trying to do the same in Virginia. But, you know, again, this is only going after one source. We're trying to attack this from multiple ways, but shutting off those sources of PFAS that's ending up in our waterways and our bodies and our environment is really an important step. This is why I'm so concerned about plastic, though, is plastic production in the United States is increasing. So while we may be very effective and successful at eliminating things like coal ash and how it's getting to the environment, or PFAS, plastic use and plastic production is only increasing, and this is becoming a crisis in this country that we're going to have to face at some point.
Well, I wanted to thank you all, especially the Riverkeepers, for all of the expert knowledge and on the ground issues. If we have gotten you excited or upset, Stay tuned. We are going to give you an outlet for channeling that. We're working on some action alerts. We still have bill numbers rolling in. We're going to get that on our website, send out this recording to you, send out a fact sheet on the bills we're working on, and we are happy to answer your questions anytime, and know that this team is out being the eyes and the ears in the river, and trying to ensure protection for us all. So thank you everyone for joining today. And thank you, Dean, Brent, and Mark.
Thank you, Betsy. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Help us spread the word. Take care, y'all.
You too.